Okay, so good day everyone. Today we are going to discuss the topic discrimination on the basis of SOGIE in the Philippines and laws and policies on violence and discrimination of the members of LGBTQ plus. So here, we are going to determine the various Philippine laws and policies for protection of rights of member of LGBTQ plus. Also identify the different anti-discriminatory laws and policies, and of course, know the acts leading to violation of these laws and policies. So we are your reporters for today. I am Hykie Justo together with my co-reporters, Chrestine Borbon, Mariam Borja, Rena Deslate, and Keefe Mentino. So let us start with the 1987 Constitution. So before we further discuss this one, let us first know what a constitution is. So when we say constitution, it is the fundamental of the land. So as discussed months aton nga oblikon, it is the law of the people. So meaning the people are ones that that gratifies the law. So all laws are like enacted by the Congress and must conform to the Constitution. So going back, um, the 1987 Constitution, um, uh, here, it states that the value of dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect for human rights. It also states that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall only person be denied the equal protections of law. So here, um, the Constitution or the 1987 Constitution established a representative democracy with power divided among three separate and independent branches of the government: the executive, bicameral legislature, and the judiciary. So basically, when we say executive, these are the ones that executes the law. This is headed by the president. Legislative are the ones that makes the law, and the judiciary are the ones who interprets the law, which is headed by the chief justice. And take note, guys, the highest form of land is the Supreme Court. So the Constitutional Commission of 1986, headed by Cecilia Munoz Palma and Ambrosio Padilla. Who are these people? So Cecilia Munoz Palma was a Filipino jurist and the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court of the Philippines. And Ambrosio Padilla was a Filipino basketball player and an elected member of the Senate of the Philippines. So next, we have here the equal protection and due process clause. So we have here the Article 2, Section 9. So the state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect of human rights. So this is declared by the Republic of the Philippines. So this principle is drawn from UN, which proclaims that the basis of freedom, justice and peace is like founded in on the recognition of the inherent dignity and equality of human beings. So we have here the Article 3, Section 1. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied equal protection of laws. So um, uh, the 14th amendment, for example, bar states from what do you call this one, depriving like any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, which was this was interpreted at the time to indicate that the government may only deprive a person of rights based on the law applied by a court. So, Rafi?
Okay, so moving on, as what Ms. Hykie has said, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of the laws. Let us break down this article, this section in the specific article by knowing what do we mean by due process and what do we mean by equal protection of the laws. First, what do we mean by due process? When we say due process, for example, if a person is deprived of life, liberty, or property by the state, it must be done only under the authority of a valid law. And also, it should be after the compliance with the regular methods or procedure that is prescribed by the law. Okay, so it should be within the law and within the prescriptions of the law. That is how we perform due process. To understand it better, the due process can be understood in two ways. First, we have procedural. It means that there is procedures in the law. There should be notices and hearings. There should be a jurisdiction over the person or the subject matter, meaning there's a court with the power to hear both sides, with the power to hear the subject matter. And also there's an impartial court or tribunal, meaning there's a fair court. And also there is a chance given to be heard for both parties, and the judgment shall only be given after a lawful amount of hearings. The judgment is not given instantly. And also, when we say due process, it can also refer to the substantive part, meaning there is no exercise of arbitrary power. So what do we mean by this no exercise of arbitrary power? Meaning everyone should be dealt by law. Okay? So no decisions should just be made by gut feel or should be made by choosing the easier solution. Everyone should be dealt by what is stated in the law. There should be a basis for the punishment or for the decision made to a party. Okay, so that's what we mean by no exercise of arbitrary power. Now we already know what is due process. What do we mean now by equal protection? When we say equal protection, what comes to our mind is that each person is dealt equally by law, as what the due process states. But we know that people, things, circumstances are different in reality. Everyone is different in reality. That's why, to make it simple, everyone belonging to the same class must be treated the same way. Or to avoid discrimination, similarly situated persons or things must be treated similarly. For example, if you're both students, you should be treated similarly. Diba? No one should be, no favoritism should happen. That's a very simple example. Okay. So to understand deeper topic that we have here the laws and guidelines that are additionally to protect the people from gender-based discrimination, because this type of discrimination is very rampant nowadays. So we divide it into two. We have the violence and discrimination against LGBTQ plus youth in education in the workforce. So let's start first in the youth in the educational setting. So in this one, there are two laws and guidelines that help people help protect from gender-based discrimination. First, we have the Anti-Bullying Act of 2013, or the RA 10627. So this seeks to address hostile environment at school that disrupts the education process, which in turn is not conducive to the total development of a child at school. So this specifically includes gender-based bullying as a prohibited and punishable act. So from the title itself, meaning it's anti-bullying, no to bullying. Okay. So to understand better the act, what does RA 10627 mean by bullying? How does it define bullying? So when we say bullying, it is any severe or repeated use by one or more students of a written, verbal, or electronic expression of a physical act or gesture, or any combination directed at another student that has the effect of causing or placing the student in a reasonable fear, physical or emotional harm, or damage to his property. Okay? So if it places fear, harm, and damage to the property of of the student, that is bullying. If it's severe, repeated, may it be written, verbal, digital, cyber, physical, it's bullying. Okay? It creates a hostile environment at the school for the other student, infringing on the rights of the other students at the school, or materially and substantially disrupting the educational process or the orderly operation of the school. Okay? So here are some acts to really understand what do they mean by bullying. So example of bullying, uh, for example, those unwanted physical contacts between the bully and the victim. For example, when the bully punches, when the bully pushes someone, when she shoves, when he kicks, when we slap, over tickling, school pranks that are inflicting, that are damaging, teasing, fighting, and the use of available objects as a weapon. So those can be considered as bullying. Also, when we say bullying, any act that causes the damage to the victim's psyche or to the victim's emotional well-being, to their soul, to their mind, to their spirit. Also, we can consider bullying any slanderous, any misstatement or accusation that causes the victim an undue emotional distress. For example, you direct a foul language or profanity to your target victim. Or also when you do name calling, when you comment to a person negatively based on his looks, clothes, and body, you torment them, you cause mental suffering. And also, the most rampant example of bullying outright nowadays are the cyber bullying, or this is the bullying done through the use of technology or any electronic means. Now, when there is bullying, there is of course the anti-bullying policies. So we have the prohibition of bullying on school grounds, properties, and territories, but also on non-school grounds with the use of electronic devices, meaning cyberbullying, bawal din yon. Prohibition rin of retaliation against a person who reports bullying. What do we mean by this? We prohibit someone, okay, we prohibit a bully, for example, to retaliate the one who reported him, to kumbag in the local term, to prohibit him to balos. Okay, so because there's a tendency that the bully will balos the one who reported, so that's why we prohibit that. Okay, and then last is we educate students, we educate parents on the dynamics of the bullying, the anti-bullying policies of the school, as well as the mechanisms of such school for the anonymous reporting of acts of bullying or retaliation. Now, the second law and guideline aiming to protect the gender-based discrimination in education is we have the Child Protection Policy of 2012. So in cases where bullying is committed by an authority figure, what do we mean by an authority figure in school? These are the principals, these are the teachers or other school personnel. The law being violated is the DepEd Order number 40 on Child Protection Policy. What are the prohibited acts according to this policy? First, child abuse. Okay? Physical, sexual abuse, grooming can also be part of this. Second, discrimination against children, discrimination by race, discrimination by gender, and discrimination even by the class or intellect. Okay. Third, child exploitation. What do we mean by this? For example, child being forced to do domestic work, recruited for pornography, for armed conflict, and etc. Illegal recruitment. Okay. Fourth prohibited act, we have violence against children in school. So we know that the violence is never a good solution. Corporal punishment, for example, physical discipline method that inflicts pain. For example, the spanking of the teacher to a student, pinching, hitting someone, forcing a student to do something, to eat something, forcing the student to not to do something. And also any analogous or similar acts than that, and bullying or peer abuse. Now, to move forward more to a more wider scope, we have here the violence and discrimination against LGBTQ plus in the workplace. So first, we have the Labor Code of the Philippines, or the Presidential Decree 442. So under here, we have the general provisions in the Article 3, which is the declaration of the basic policy. It states that the state shall afford protection to labor, promote full employment. Here is the one. Ensure equal work opportunities regardless of sex, race, and creed. Okay? So whether what gender or sex you have, there should be equal work opportunities. The state shall assure the rights of workers to self-organization, collective bargaining, security of tenure, and just and humane conditions of work. Also, there are other articles which we have Article 130 of the said code. It's in the night work prohibition here. No woman, regardless of age, shall be employed or permitted to suffer in work with or without compensation. No woman is allowed to suffer in work. Article 132, facilities for women. The Secretary of Labor and Employment shall establish standards that will ensure the safety and health of the women employees. In appropriate cases, he shall, by regulations, require any employer to first provide seats that are proper for women, and not just provide them, but permit them to use such seats when they are free from work and during working hours, provided that they can perform their duties in this position without detriment to efficiency. So for example, the women are wearing skirts and they are uncomfortable, and the seats are also uncomfortable to them. So the employer should provide them proper seats. Also, there should be a separate toilet rooms and lavatories for women, and provide at least a dressing room for women. Diba? So, and also actually, pinupursue rin yung separate, I don't know if there are bills that pursuing separate rooms for LGBT, but they're also saying that mas mabuti na lang na kung saan nila na-identify yung gender nila, doon sila pupunta. But the important thing here is dapat merong separate toilet rooms. Okay? Hindi pwede na yung men at saka women, iisa lang yung CR nila. Okay? And also, there should be a nursery in a workplace for the benefit of the women employees therein. For example, may meron mga breastfeeding areas for those who really cannot leave their babies alone in their home. And also, we have Article 135, discrimination prohibited. It shall be unlawful for any employer to discriminate against any woman employee with respect to terms and conditions of employment solely on the account of her sex. No discrimination just because she is a woman. The following are acts of discrimination. First, when the employee pays a lesser compensation. Kumbaga, a male employee has a better salary than the woman just because she is a woman. And also, favoring a male employee over a female employee in terms of promotion, training opportunities, study, and scholarship grants, just also because she's a woman. For example, the woman is already in the work for around 5 years, and there's an open spot for promotion, and she really performs well actually. And then there's a male who's just been there for 2 years, and performs so moderately good, but the male was the one promoted because the boss does not want the female, just because he said it, she's a female. I don't I don't like that. So that's a discrimination. Okay. And lastly, but not the least, in terms of laws and guidelines for the discrimination in the workplace, you have the Civil Service Commission number 01-0940, the Civil Service Commission's policy on anti-sexual harassment. So it includes prohibitions on derogatory or the disrespectful and degrading remarks or innuendos. What do we mean by this? These are, for example, allusive hints in Bisaya or in Tagalog, mga patama na in a suggestive way, directed toward the members of one sex or of one's sexual orientation or used to describe a person. So those are the laws and guidelines that are aiming to protect people from the gender-based discrimination. Now we have this next topic to provide us an in-depth discussion of the said violence and discrimination against the LGBTQ.
Okay. So as a continuation, I will also further discuss the topic about the violence and discrimination against LGBTQ+, especially in the various settings. So many of the LGBTQ+ members face discrimination and violence due to their SOGIE, and despite the existing laws and provisions that aims to protect them, there are still perpetrators who are not afraid to show their hostility or violence towards those members of the community, refusing to acknowledge the probable punishment or sanction of their action, and this led to arise a lot of concern across the various settings that place LGBTQ+ members at disadvantage. So there are 4 examples of a various setting where violence and discrimination against LGBTQ+ takes place. So it could be in the educational setting, in the workforce, by a certain religious groups, and also in the military. So first, let's take a look in the educational setting. Okay. So the 2017 report by the Human Rights Watch presented findings on discrimination and against the member of the LGBTQ+ in the Philippines. So based on the survey, 61% who express gender nonconformity or the people who are part of the LGBTQ+ at school, ranging from elementary to graduate school, reported an abuse. So in K-12 level, 78% were harassed, 35% were physically assaulted, 12% were sexually assaulted, and 6% were expelled. So sa 78% na naharas, sadly, 31% sa ila were harassed by teachers and school staff. In addition, 15% decided to leave school because of the intensity of harassment. So parang it's too much that it triggers their vulnerability side, which caused them to unable to counterattack those mistreatments and bullying they experience. So 11% naman lost or could not get a financial aid or scholarship because of their gender. So despite of the policies and provisions that are strong on paper, it has not been adequately enforced. So these are some of the reasons for its occurrence. Okay. First is minimal or absent organization catering to the interest and welfare of the LGBTQ+. So parang ang konti or hindi masyadong visible ang mga organization that caters them. Kung meron nga namang mga organisasyong ganito, other than the allies, the majority of the members are the LGBTQ+ mismo. So mostly parang sila rin lang talaga ang nagkikater ng kanilang interest at welfare. And this is a sad fact, because if it's true that there are a lot of organizations that espouse or supports them, why does discrimination and violence in the community society? Next is lack of trained and supportive counselors or teachers. But of course, this statement is not in general. Okay, so there are cases lang kasi as what we saw in some of the news na may mga teachers na kung saan mismo sa kanila nanggagaling ang discrimination and even nag-i-initiate ng harassment. So this could be a reason that this kind of treatments or actions will be extended to the students, thinking that discrimination and violence are all right, especially if these people wanted to point out that gender should be in binary. Next is sexuality education is often focused on understanding the reproductive system, contraception, or protection to avoid pregnancy. Especially nagiging prevalent issue rin sa society ang teenage pregnancy, and of course, heterosexual relations having a less highlight or emphasis on gender issues and inclusivity. Next is values, education, and theology classes. So it tends to discuss homosexuality as a sin because many or some people believe that God only created man and woman, and an individual must only be attracted to its opposite sex and nothing else. But the truth is, the Bible never did explicitly show that God talks about homosexuality, which prohibits these people be attracted or to love someone with the same sex. Next is discriminatory policies and practices that exclude the LGBT students from fully participating in the school environment. So in addition, as what we can notice sa school, diba, it imposes rigid policies with regards to gender uniform, hair length, and other elements of physical appearance that tends to be in binary or restrictive. So cross-dressing is not allowed, and boys are not allowed to have long hair despite of their SOGIE because mostly school always preferred it clean cut. So we have here an example issue connected to the statement above. So Mira Soldi, a 20-year-old transgender woman, shared her experience when she was in high school. So according to her, there was a teacher who always went around, and if you had a long hair where you're not supposed to as based on your biological sex, that teacher would cut the hair of that student in front of the other student also. And this happened to Mira so many times, and it made her felt terrible. Just imagine the repeated humiliation that she got every time it happens to her. And it hurts her because she can't do anything but to abide to the restrictive binary standard. So moving forward is another reason, which is the prevailing stereotype that gays are reliable in school activities. So for example, kasi sa mga pagpaplano or pag-organize ng mga activities, so parang there is a stereotype that it is the expertise ng mga gays. So imagine again the pressure for members of the LGBTQ plus to look and act in a respectable manner and excel in order to compensate for being a gay, na parang ganyan na nga lang ang kanilang ambagay, dapat gawin lang ng tama, which I totally disagree because I believe that your gender doesn't limit your capacity and ability to do things. But sadly, in reality, once na magkamali sila, mostly na inaatake or pinupoint out ay yung gender nila. So another setting is the workplace or workforce. Okay, so 90% of people who had been surveyed experience harassment in the workplace. So 47 of LGBTQ plus who had been surveyed reported not getting a job and not getting a promotion or is being fired because of being a transgender or gender non-conforming. And this is what we call a form of employment discrimination. So next. So my next slide. So my mga LGBT employees rin who experience harassment in their workplace, like physical harassment due to their sexual orientation or identity, like being punched, hit, or beaten up. So LGBT employees of color or people who are Black were significantly more likely to experience a verbal harassment at work because of their sexual orientation or gender identity than white LGBT employees. So in terms of verbal, mas malala ang mga derogatory words na natatanggap nila. So furthermore, transgender employees were significantly more likely to report experiencing verbal harassment over the course of their gender than the cisgender LGB or the lesbian, gay, and bisexual employees. So in many cases, verbal harassment, harassment na natatanggap nila came from their supervisors, co-workers, and even to their customers. And even in terms of sexual harassment, mas mataas rin ang reported cases ng mga transgender employees who experience it compared to cisgender LGBT employees. So in conclusion, while the diversity and inclusion have climbed the corporate agendas over the past decades, many LGBTQ plus employees continue to face discrimination, discomfort, and even danger in the workplace. So many of them remain in their closet or hiding their true gender identity and changing their physical appearance in according to their biological markers. So some of them even left their jobs or consider leaving their job because of the unfair treatment. So next setting is by certain religious groups. So efforts to address discrimination against LGBT people have met with resistance or refusal to accept, including the religious leaders. So certain religious groups assert that while there should be a tolerance for homosexual people, homosexuality or having sexual relations with the same sex is considered as a sin. So the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, where it is an organizational assembly of the Catholic bishops of the Philippines, has condemned violence and discrimination against LGBT people. But in practice, Gidya, the Roman Catholic Church has resisted or refused laws and policies that would protect LGBT rights. So we have here an example. So in 2017, the church sought or seek amendments or changes to pending anti-discrimination legislation that would prohibit same-sex marriage and allow religious objectors to opt out or make choices of recognizing LGBT rights. So the CBCP has opposed implementation of comprehensive sexuality education in school, which for them, the school must enforce gender as being binary only. So the representative of the church warns that recognizing LGBT rights will open the door to same-sex marriage and oppose legislation that might promote divorce. For example, is that one of the spouse realize that they are attracted pala to their same sex, which they would likely to look forward for divorce. Next is euthanasia or painless killing. For example, an LGBT member might opted for it to finish their sufferings by ending their lives due to depression and discrimination that they receive in the society. Next is abortion, total population control, which could be one of the way or reason of the decrease of overpopulation. And lastly, of course, is homosexual marriage. So as what you can notice, the first letter of the five words, when combined, it results to an acronym of death, which is why they believe that homosexuality should not be normalized. So the church talaga has shaped attitudes toward homosexuality and transgender identities throughout the country, citing religious doctrines, teachers, counselors, and other authority figures often impress upon students that it is immoral or unnatural to be LGBT. So last example setting is in the military. Okay. So prevailing images of characteristics of a proper and decent member of the military indicates a lingering prejudices and negative stereotypes of the LGBTQ plus because based in the perception of the image of an army or soldier, straight person was what highly recommended because many believe that they can handle it more not only physically and appearance but also morally, mentally, and emotionally. But of course, it doesn't mean that only the straight can possess the all stated aspect. They just need to make sure that they possess all of this to be fully equipped for doing the job, especially when they are given the mission. But Ernesto Torres, the spokesperson of the AFP, recently invited gay men and lesbian to join the Philippine military. He emphasizes that all military personnel should adhere to the military code of ethics and observe proper decorum, in which, according to this policy, openly gay men and lesbian and those who cross-dress can be dishonorably discharged. And once inside the military, gays and lesbian must hide their sexuality to remain there. So, in addition, okay. In addition, although the invitation is seen as a step forward for the LGBT rights in the Philippines, the activists still continue to campaign for the removal of discriminatory provisions addressing homosexuality in the AFP Code of Ethics. So there is no clear-cut provisional directive and clearly state that sexual orientation or gender identity may not be used against someone applying for military service or to current military personnel. In fact, some of the provisions of the Code of Ethics can still be used to discriminate against lesbian and gay members of the military, especially those who are outed or have revealed their sexual identity while in the service. So here are some of the reason why okay, why the presence of known homosexuals might affect the mission accomplishment. So first is the reduction of fighting skills. So over manifestation of homosexuality will mean reduction of fighting skills of a particular combat unit anchored from instability and indecisiveness when faced with a situation that will threaten their lives. So correspondingly, this will give the enemy the reason to be more aggressive. Second is the security risk. So an enemy, for example, might tempt the person or an army who are gay or part of the LGBT with a sexual favor as a bribe for the information of that person possession, and they might feel vulnerable with it. Next is it affects cohesion of the military units. So practicing homosexual when engaged in a relationship cease to be a members of the unit in a social and emotional sense, or pagkakaroon ng same-sex relationship ng isang miyembro sa kapwa miyembro within the military units, which this can affect of doing their job properly, especially in defensive roles. So maaaring maging cause ito ng pagkakaroon ng destruction, especially if these people are in one team. And lastly is the public perception. So the AFP should present a credible manifestation of strength so as to create a deterrent posture, and it can affect their credibility if the marching troops appears to be effeminate or when the command are religiously feminine. And the AFP will be subjected to public ridicule and can be a reason which the totality of the armed forces might lose respect from or within itself, the people, and to the enemy. And what is more dangerous is that the AFP will reduce its aggressiveness in fighting wars because of this, and can result to a situation that makes the enemy develop the superiority complex, which it is an important factor in winning a war. So with the claims above, or I have said earlier, the AFP doesn't actually discriminate homosexual as a person, but the contentious issue is their fitness in the profession of arms. But of course, the violence and discrimination in the LGBT are still inevitable within the military. So may it be from the soldier or the members or even from the superiors, at hindi pa rin yun bigla-biglang nawawala. So furthermore, military policies must be based on actual making a sound judgment, not on the fixed idea of sexual equality or the gender of the person. So it means masasabi or mako-consider lang nila na i-discharge o wag kunin ng tao for the job if ever nakikita nila mismo that the person is not capable of doing the job, basing in their abilities and attitudes rather than their gender. So moreover, it is maintained that individual who displays and manifests overacts or uh, uh, over excessiveness of their homosexual orientation and the propensity to indulge in such act shall be executed in the profession of arms.
The Anti-Discrimination Bill was introduced by Senator Francis Pangilinan. He is currently running for the position of the second highest executive official of the government of the Philippines, which is the Vice President. The Senate Bill number 689 is an act prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity or expression, SOGIE, more commonly referred to as the Anti-Discrimination Bill, and it is currently being studied in the upper and lower houses of the government. The Philippines rank second as the most gay-friendly country in the whole Asia-Pacific after Australia. The Philippines, on the other hand, is more tolerant and accepting of the LGBT community. So according to a UN report, 30% of the LGBT people in the country have been harassed, bullied, or discriminated against at work because of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. And according to the same study, 21% of the Filipino respondents believe they were denied a job because of their SOGIE. This proposed legislation aims to finally eliminate hate and discrimination against the LGBT community by giving them full acceptance and not just tolerance. And this bill also aims to create a safe, equitable, and reasonable environment for everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. In this bill, the state recognizes the fundamental right of every person to be free from discrimination, regardless of their sex, age, class, status, ethnicity, color, disability, religious and political beliefs, and of course their SOGIE. As a result, it will step up its efforts to uphold its obligation under international and domestic law to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights and dignity of all people. And the state shall exert efforts to address all forms of discrimination and violence based on sexual orientation or gender identity and to promote human dignity as enshrined in the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Okay, the following are considered discriminatory and are prohibited acts according to the bill if done based on SOGIE. Number one, promote and encourage stigma based on SOGIE in the media and educational textbooks and other mediums. Inciting violence and sexual abuse against any person or group based on SOGIE is likewise prohibited. Second is including SOGIE as well as disclosure of sexual orientation in the criteria for hiring, promotion, transfer, dismissal, and other human resource movement and action. Refusing admission or expulsion of a person from any educational or training institution. Next is denying a person access to public or private medical and health services open to the general public, as well as access to public and private health insurance, including HMOs. Denying a person access to or the use of establishments, facilities, utilities, or services, including housing open to the general public. Subjecting any person, natural or judicial, to profiling, detention, or verbal or physical harassment by members of law enforcement agencies. Last is subjecting a person to any other analogous acts that shall have the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the enjoyment, recognition, and exercise of a person's human rights and fundamental freedoms. So here are the following examples of experiences with regards to SOGIE. So first in line, we have persons with diverse sexual orientation and gender identities experience abuse and violence ranging from subtle jokes to extreme forms of stigma and assault from their families, neighbors, educational or training institutions, and even government institutions. Okay, so the hostility that the LGBT face is often exacerbated by discriminatory policies and practices. Okay, when we talk about gender-based violence and abuse, we're talking about harmful acts that are perpetrated against a person because of their gender. Gender inequality, power abuse, and harmful norms are at the root of it. And gender-based violence and abuse is a grave human rights violation. And LGBT students in the Philippines are often the target of ridicule and even violence, said Ryan Thorson, a fellow in the LGBT rights program at Human Rights Watch. According to him, in many instances, teachers and administrators are participating in this mistreatment instead of speaking out against discrimination and creating classrooms where everybody can learn. Second is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people often experience lost economic opportunities due to discrimination in employment, just being required to wear clothes according to their sex assigned at birth as a condition for hiring and outright refusal to hire applicants on the ground of their SOGIE. Okay, so discrimination, harassment, and exclusion from the labor force often occur because of perceived non-conformity with heteronormativity, or it is the social belief that being heterosexual is normal. And of course, and because of the preconceptions of how women and men are expected to appear and behave. Many LGBT people hide their sexual orientation for fear of discriminatory treatment and violence, the inability to obtain identity documents that reflect their gender and name, employers' unwillingness to accept the way they dress, and increased vulnerability to bullying and harassment by coworkers are all issues that they face in the workplace. Sometimes LGBT employees were also dismissed or denied promotions unfairly. Third example is that prejudicial attitudes of some law enforcers and service providers towards LGBT people deter them from reporting cases of abuse and violence committed against them. Discrimination and harassment by law enforcers is an ongoing and pervasive problem for LGBT people. Harassed members of the LGBTQ plus community, especially the youth, seeking help are hindered by the lack of information and resources about them. LGBT issues are rarely discussed in the school curriculum, and when they do arise, teachers often make negative or dismissive comments about LGBT students, including like instruct them their students that their gender or their sexual orientation is sinful or unnatural. Last example is that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals encounter significant barriers in receiving accessible and inclusive health care and finding medical providers that are knowledgeable about their needs. Studies reveal that members of the LGBT group are more susceptible to health problems like abuse of alcohol, cigarettes and illicit drugs, unprotected sex, mental disorders, and of course, sexual transmitted diseases and HIV and AIDS. Although this is a multifactorial scenario, it may be further complicated because of the poor access to healthcare and the discriminatory practices of involved professionals stemming from homophobia. The fact is that the experiences of prejudice and discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation present in the attitudes of the area professionals against sexual minorities can directly contribute to poorer health status.
So now let's go on to the effects of state discrimination in society. So the first one, a lack of state support for people on the basis of their SOGIE allows for homophobia and the stigma surrounding conversations about the LGBTQ plus, which in turn create a hostile and dangerous environment. So in other words, the state's lack of urgency na magpass ng isa ka law that recognize and protect LGBT leaves them invisible in the eyes of the law. So since wala sang protections made available for them, the overwhelming amount sang hate, rejection, and continued violations sang ilang nga human rights continue since madali lang para sa iba nga mag-commit sang discriminatory practices against LGBT given nga wala sang legislation nga naga-prohibit kag naga-penalize of such acts. Although may ara gani isang SOGIE equality bill but it is not yet effective as a law, wala pa siya ma-enact. So as long as wala sang SOGIE equality law, the LGBT will constantly become victims of gender-based discrimination, and this will enable more and more incidents of violence and abuse. So here are the following instances on why the society remains to be a hostile environment for LGBT community. So the first one, bullying and teasing towards LGBTQ plus people through mean language and name calling. So this is the very common way to affront LGBTQ plus people through demeaning language and disparaging comment. So for example, there are people who say that's so gay instead of saying na lang that's stupid and dumb. So this is very insulting to those who identify themselves as a gay, given parang naging synonymous yung gender nila into something stupid and dumb. So very offensive siya sa side nila kasi in the eyes of others, yung pagkatao nila parang equivalent lang into something demoralizing. May araman iban nga nagagamit sang term na fagot to humiliate gay men or those who are perceived to be gay. And this is also a hurtful remark. Naman ulit, given nga magambal ka fagot sa isa ka gay person, you mean na burden siya or difficult to bear or kung baga do pabigat or hindi ka tanggap-tanggap. So people would usually use fagot para ipamukha sa LGBT or sa gay specifically nga hindi sila welcome diri sa society or wala sila lugar diri sa lipunan. So next, hate crimes against LGBTQ plus people because of who they are. So there are a lot of cases of assaulted and murdered LGBTQ plus diri sa country naton, and that includes ang kay Jennifer Louden na case which we'll later discuss more. So again, ang hate crimes, this just means nga there are a lot of people gidya nga very unwelcoming or unaccepting sa idea nga may mga nag-exist outside the binary gender. So usually mga homophobic, biphobic or transphobic ini sila. And because they hate LGBT so much, what they would do is to cause them pain, to torture, and even worse, passion pa. 'Di ba? So that's why very dangerous ang lipunan gidya para sa mga LGBT. Adverse health outcomes for LGBTQ plus people such as major depressive disorder, binge drinking, substance use, and suicidality. So if life has become too much to bear for LGBTQ plus, may mga times na nagsasuffer sila ng mga things na dapat hindi man nila pagdaanan or experience, and they also do things na hindi man dapat nila pag-ubrahon given nga damaging sila health and well-being. But if sobra-sobra na ang pag-alipusta or like pagmaliit sa ila, nafe-feel depressed man na sila. Ikaw man David, di ba? You are in a situation nga very upsetting and stressful. What would you feel? Di ba? So oftentimes LGBTQ plus, they feel so low, they feel so sad, they feel worthless, and parang wala na direction in ila life. Kasi bisan diin man na sila magkadto, dugi na api-api lang sila. And to cope, they binge drink and use substance. So parang ito yung way nila na bisan in a short span of time lang, kahit risky sila health, ma-feel nila na komportable sila or like numb. Wala silang may maramdaman nga sakit or like maset aside nila tanan nga pasakit nga ginadala nila. And the last one, the suicidality, if sobra-sobra na gid ya, hindi mo gid man mabasol man sila if why they would attempt to end their life na lang. But this one is very alarming kasi, di ba, no one deserves na i-end yung life niya dahil lang sa pressure na nafe-feel niya from the people around. So the next one is the lack of national policy that prohibits discriminatory practices leaves LGBTQ plus people with no recourse for redress. So since wala gani isang legislation nga naka-craft gidya bala para sa LGBT, it leaves them with no chance to rectify or correct the situation. Or whenever like a person or a party, for example, has done them wrong, hindi nila makasuhan since wala gani isang lay nga nagahambal nga muna nasa laining. Like for example, Dabi, kung hindi ka pagbatunon sa isa ka university tungod lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender ka, or hindi ka pag-i-promote kitungod LGBT ka, so wala silang mahimo kundi accept nga muna gid ang ilang kumbaga mo ang the way nga itrato sila. That's why hindi nila tagaan hustisya kumbaga ang ilang mga discrimination nga ginaagyan. So the second one, members of the LGBTQ plus often lack support from their families and face harassment in institutions such as schools, their church, and workplace. So not only the state lacks support sa LGBT, but as well ilang families, ang schools, ang church, and workplace. So ma-feel mo gid nga bisan, I mean, in every corner of the society, detached gid ang LGBT. Parang naka-separate gid sila ya, iba gid ang panulok sila. And this not only alienates an already marginalized sector, but more importantly, it deprives them of their rights, freedom, and opportunities that should be accorded to them simply for being a human. So hindi nila totally ma-exercise ila rights, wala sila sang kalayaan nga ipagwa ila tuod nga balatyagon and mga opportunities nga tani pwede man nila ma-experience kay tungod gani part sila sang isa ka community nga wala naga conform sa norms ng society. So here are the following examples na related diri sa ikatuwa nga effect. So relatives often shun their LGBTQ plus family members. So may mga times if imo ka mag-anak hindi ka ma-accept nga LGBT ka or they cannot fathom nga managmuna ka, paano ka naging muna? So since they cannot come into terms to your identity, what they would do is to purposely ignore you or like mas malala hindi ka na nila kilalanon as kapamilya nila. And this is very scary to those nga ma-come out as an LGBT. Kay wala sang assurance nga imo family i-accept ka bala, suportahan ka bala, or itakwil ka lang. Diba? So bisan kay sino lang mapapamilya mo man or mapa-friends mo, wala gid just ang guarantee nga agad-agad i-accept kanila kung ano ka. So LGBTQ plus students are physically assaulted at school because their sexual orientation and gender identity are different than those of heterosexual students. So physical assault is usually in the forms of slapping, punching, kicking, pushing, and it's very disheartening nga sa school mismo may amusan ni nga klase nga abuse na naga-occur. Given nga dapat 'di ba ang school is a safe place for students regardless man sang ilang nga SOGIE to interact, learn, and grow. But how can they do that? Especially ang LGBTQ plus students. If mismo kaklase nila ginasakit sila, 'di ba? How can they even thrive if wala sila ginagaan chance nga magpakatotoo sa sarili nila? So the next one is co-workers are distant and cold to LGBTQ plus colleagues. So sa mga workplace, may mga times kigma niya nga if LGBT ka, wala ka ginasapak, wala ka ginarespeto, or wala gina ga-matter imo nga existence para sa imo mga katrabaho. Kumbaga daw, para sa imo co-workers, you are nothing, or like you are not valuable as a team, and they also are not willing to work with you because hindi sila comfortable sa imo nga gender. So for example, dapat ang mga lalaki and babae nga straight employees, they have to work with gays or lesbians, pero hindi sila at ease kay na-awkwardan sila kay tungod gani mina sa ilang nga gender. So next is getting legally fired just for being LGBTQ plus members. So may mga times kid man niya, like people can be cruel. Like come to think of it, although wala ka man ginahimo nga malain or like something worthy para i-fire ka, but then you're out of work kay LGBT ka. Diba? If for example dabi kung babae ka nga straight or lalaki ka nga straight, hindi ka man pag-i-fire. But since kani LGBT ka, may ara gid sang degrading or like unfair treatment towards you. Next is same-sex couples not being allowed to marry. So our country does not recognize nor provide any legal rights to same-sex marriage, for it only allows a union between a man and a woman. So one of the main reason kung nga man hindi malegalize sa Philippines ang same-sex marriage is tungod gani we are a Catholic country. So if ever i-allow sang state, it would weaken or like contradict the teachings nga ara sa Bible. And also, mga Catholic churches man diri sa aton, very vocal sila nga oppose sila sa idea of union of homosexual couples. They are not open to celebrate and legitimize union sa mga same-sex couples. So if ever nga homosexual couples ka mo, then you plan to get married, so I think you can do it outside the country, but it would cost you a lot of money. But then if wala ka mo gana enough financial, then you have to wait until it is legal na diri sa Philippines. But I don't know if when pa siya mag-legalize. So now let's discuss the contemporary issues na related ulit sa LGBT. So we have the first one, the Jennifer Laude case. So Jennifer Laude is a trans woman Filipina who got brutally murdered at the hands of U.S. soldier Joseph Scott Pemberton on October 11, 2014. The suspect, who got convicted of killing a transgender woman in the Philippines in 2014, has been granted in a case that sparked outrage over alleged free and absolute pardon by President Rodrigo Duterte, differential treatment given to American military personnel on assignment in the country. So Jennifer Laude was found dead. She was naked with her head submerged sa isa ka toilet bowl. And kung paano nakadto sa madto nga brutal nga murder si Jennifer was when Pemberton discovered na transgender si Jennifer. And that prompted him to kill the victim. Pemberton even said nga he was raped. Like, he believes na kumbaga doon natunto man sa bala. given nga he did not give a consent to a man na makipag-sex siya. So he got disgusted sang nabalaan niya nga lalaki man si Jennifer or kumbaga hindi bala biological female. And that how that what lead to a murder na crime. So later, mga pila lang ka months ang naglipas, na-convict si Pemberton. Pero mga pila man lang ka years, like I think less than 6 years lang, nga pagka-priso, he was granted with an absolute pardon halin kay Duterte. And that received major backlash halin sa LGBT organizations because they believe na as long as Pemberton walks free, wala justice para kay Jennifer. And they also kumbaga ginapaglaban gid nila ya nga kung ano ang ginobra ni Pemberton kay Jennifer was a blatant display of hate crime towards LGBT. So nag-spark gid siya sang major outrage from the LGBTQ plus community kay though wala-wala lang ang kaso ni Jennifer. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's discuss another case of like contemporary issues. Here we have like cases in school. So wait lang. The like occurrence of like detailed in this study highlight the critical significance of like broadening and implementing like LGBTQ plus youth safeguard in school. So students in the Philippines, for example, like revealed patterns of bullying and like harassment that remained undetected by school employees despite anti-bullying laws. So here, in the case of Carlos M., a 19-year-old gay student from Olongapo City, said, "When I was in high school, they'd push me, punch me. When I'd get out of school, they'd follow me and push me, call me gay, sagot, things like that." While verbal bullying appeared to be the most prevalent problem that LGBT students face, physical bullying and sexualized harassment were also worryingly common. And while students were most often the culprits, teachers ignored or participated in bullying as well. The effects of this bullying were devastating to the youth who were targeted. Another case, which is like Benji a 20-year-old gay man in Manila who was bullied throughout his education, said, "I was depressed, I was bullied, I didn't know my sexuality, I felt unloved, I felt alone all the time, and I had friends, but I still felt so lonely. I was listing ways to die." When students face these issues, whether in isolation or together, the school can become difficult or hostile environment. So it is extremely harmful form of harassment and gender discrimination that can lead to gender what do you call this one, dysphoria or like depression and other mental health issues in the victim. So like according sa study, like only 15% lang sa Filipinos reside in areas protected by ordinances against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So it just saddens me because the place where we are supposed to learn and like develop our growth are one some of like students experience their traumas. So schools should be like safe place for everyone. But in the Philippines, students who are lesbian or gay or like parts ng LGBTQ plus are like often find their schooling experience as married by bullying, discrimination, lack of access to like LGBT related information. in some cases. So like kung kisa nalalabot na nga mas ang ginasakit na sila, and it's sometimes ang teachers wala kabalo because sometimes may mga cases, may some cases sa mga private schools nga daw ang teachers yan nahadlok kumbaga ang mas nahadlok pa sila ya sa students. So kung mina kay sometimes ang ginatawag na disiplina waay. So in some cases lang. So yeah. Next is we have here the group insights. So we have each of us has our own battles to fight and win. Victory seems to be great, but who says we have to win in order to be loved? Fortune isn't always on our side. That's all right. So what exactly are we looking for? We should not grovel for society's approval, and if some of them are too much, we should take action. There are laws out there protecting us, so we should not hesitate to stand up and speak when something is wrong. We all have various definitions of happiness and acceptance, but feeling it means the same to all of us. This is the magic of life for him, for her, for them, for you. So yeah. So I think regardless with this issues, we should start within ourselves. Because sometimes if like naka-break lang sang norm ang isa ka tao, it is quick for us to judge, 'di ba? So such as these people. And sometimes if you if you don't support the idea or ang ila pagiging part sa niya community, please do respect. So that would be all. The next slide is ang amon references. So thank you everyone for listening. We hope na na naka-learn ka mo and nakapulutan man sang aral. That would be all. Thank you.